Welcome to the Personal Podcast, where we get to meet the real person behind the professional. I'm absolutely thrilled to be speaking to Nicola Cook today, who is an entrepreneur, investor and author. So Nicola.
Hello.
Why did you have an abortion?
Ooh, this takes me back. I was just saying to you before, this is like, I know I'm talking about this and I know I've talked about this to you off air and I'm fully prepared to talk about this, but talking about it publicly is like, this is the first time that I've ever talked about this. So it's a big deal. So I'll just tell the story of kind of how it happened and then that'll answer the question why really is. So I was very young. I was 22 and this was in the early 1990s. I was living in London. I was working a corporate job, but I was in the very beginning of my corporate career. I had absolutely no securities. I had no stability. The relationship I was in at the time was quite volatile. We both at that time thought we would go the distance and it would work, but everything about the timing was wrong and it was unplanned, as in the pregnancy was unplanned. So it wasn't something that we had anticipated, expected, and then when it happened, it was really shocking. Instantly, I knew that I had no choice. And some people might argue that and say, well, you've always got a choice, but I felt that the only way that I had no resources, I didn't feel I was ready, didn't feel I had the emotional capacity yet to become a parent, didn't have any support network around me. So for me, it was a really, really hard decision. And it's also a decision that a lot of people don't realise is that you have to make very quickly, because often by the time you realise you're pregnant, and also being 20 and being a bit dim, is like, I thought pregnancy is calculated from the day of ovulation. And it's not. It's calculated from the day of the last previous period.
Yeah. I mean, I thought that in my 30s.
Yeah,
so,
I know. And I didn't realise that, because they work on it's the age of the egg is counted in weeks, as opposed to like, when the egg's being fertilised. So you're already additionally 2 more weeks pregnant than you think you are by the time you've found out. In my case, I knew that if I was going to have the strength to do it, I needed to do it like within the first trimester, like quickly. Because also, if you've ever been pregnant, you'll know instantly that your body changes and you feel very different and you know that there is something growing inside you. You know, there is a baby growing inside you, or potential baby growing inside you. So once I knew that this was something that I had to do, and I had to do quickly. And it was not an easy decision. That's all I'll say at this point, because I know you're going to ask me lots more questions about it.
Oh, absolutely. And I want to know what's the hardest thing about having an abortion?
The shame was huge, and it's one of the reasons why I've still not talked about it and didn't tell anybody. My partner at the time was equally as terrified as I was and didn't talk about it, made it quite clear what their preference was, and then kind of left me to sort of sort the details and so on. I mean, there's 2 sides to it. One is society's stigma around it, and all of the context or all of the prejudgment that brings, and so much of that is like embedded in the patriarchy and the way that women have been sexualized over centuries, and that therefore to find yourself unmarried and pregnant and however the circumstances are, is somehow your wrongdoing.
Yeah.
So there's that you're dealing with. You're also then dealing with all of your own internal feelings around knowing that you are making a life-changing decision that is not only impacting your life, it is impacting the potential life that this could bring into the world, as well as your partner's life, and knowing that it is an irreversible decision. And the pressure of it for me, it really did feel like a rock and hard place. There was no right, easy answer, or there was no right, easy decision. And even knowing that, like, deep in my gut that it was the only choice that I had, it still was incredibly difficult to do, immensely, yeah, and shockingly, and I was so unprepared for it. I'll pause there and let you ask another question. I'll just keep going.
No, and it's fine to keep going. I just wondered, did you regret having one, or do you still regret?
Yeah, so I'll go back and then I'll answer that question. So I was going to say, what I was just leading into before was like how unprepared I was for it, and how unprepared for the trauma of both the physical act of it and then also the healing from it, and then the emotional stuff that comes with it. And so I had a DNC under full anaesthetic in a small private clinic in London.
Do you want to describe what that is for people who don't know?
Yeah, so I believe that if you were to have a termination today, however many years later, decades later, is depending on where you are within your pregnancy. 95% of terminations happen within the first trimester, which is under 12 weeks of gestation. And these days, although I've not experienced this, from what I understand, is that it's you basically take some pills and you have a miscarriage at home, or the equivalent of a miscarriage at home. That you take one under supervision, and then I think they changed the law during COVID actually to allow people to have an abortion at home, which meant that because it used to have to be done in whatever.
Yes.
But it's done where basically you take some pills. The first one, I think, basically stops the placenta from working, and then the second one allows the pregnancy to pass. So whereas a DNC is basically a full operation where, and that was the only thing that was offered to me. And I think that's what all abortions were back in the 1990s, where basically you go into surgery in full surgical conditions, and, you know, I'm knocked out completely. And they go in and whatever tools they use is they basically scrape the inside of your womb away. So it's the same kind of treatment that women have if you've got really heavy periods or fibroids, or and you need that kind of treatment. And it's pretty aggressive. I also reacted really badly to the anaesthetics. I was really sick after the anaesthetic. Like, you know, it wasn't, from a dignity perspective, it was like there was no dignity. And I ended up going private into a clinic in London because the NHS, I went to see a GP. You can imagine I'm living in London, a young working professional. It's not my normal, like I hadn't even registered at a GP in London, so it wasn't somebody I knew. Had to by the time I got an appointment, then by the time they saw me, I can remember this guy's face to this day as well. He was so judgmental. You know, typical old white male, kind of looking at a young 22-year-old girl like, well, you silly little girl kind of thing. How have you got yourself into this situation? And then they couldn't offer me an abortion till I was nearly 18 weeks pregnant. And I knew that I just couldn't. I mean, like the idea of having, you know, there's a whole moral question around the right to choose. You know, I'm obviously, there's so much happened politically since in the world around abortion, since, you know, like, you know, the moral and the question around it. And you're not immune to that. And I've never thought of myself as like, you know, I'm going to say it, but like I murdered my baby. I've never had that thought. But I knew that there's no way I could wait until I could feel it moving before I terminated that pregnancy, which was the reason why I went private. And then I think the question, I've lost my train of thought now, but I think the question you're asking was like, how did I feel? So I felt, I mean, it destroyed me is the short answer. I mean, psychologically, I mean, I was not offered any counselling. I didn't know there was counselling, even if I could get it. Obviously, because I hadn't told anybody. My partner had completely shut down. You know, it was just a thing that needed to be managed as far as they were concerned, and it ultimately led to the end of that relationship. We limped along for another couple of years, but it was the core, the fundament, one of the foundational cores within our relationship was forever broken, and I was forever broken, and for a long time, and you know, you can't describe how. And of course, because you can't voice it, you're just having to swallow all of these feelings. I might get upset here all the time. And, you know, every time you're seeing someone with a baby, and what happened in my world was my partner's sister, who we were very close to, had a baby 10 days after. And of course, I'm like grieving the loss of the child that just came at the wrong time in my life for me to be able to have it. Whilst also, this new, everyone's excited because this new baby's arrived. And it was just like, it was just a catalogue of events that was just horrific. And I carried that for decades, for absolute decades. It never left me.
Do you still carry it today?
No, I have exercised that wound. I've had a lot of good therapy over the last decade for various things. Mm-hmm. And one of them was that did come up. And how it impacted me was that I never regretted the decision.
Okay.
So
yeah, that
to
was
answer the question,
yeah.
I never regretted the decision, but you always have the what ifs, so I still light a candle on certain dates. Mm-hmm. I still, occasionally your mind will drift off and you'll think, oh, well, that child would have been, which is the exact same if you've had any kind of baby loss, really. The difference is that in this mindset, you made that choice. So you have to live with it. Mm-hmm. Whereas, and as you know, I've also had miscarriages as well. Yes. Whereas if you've had baby loss of any other kind, then it's different. It feels different because it wasn't your choice to have lost that child.
I hadn't thought about it like that, but that was almost, it's harder if you feel like it was your choice.
Yeah, like you got to own it because that was the decision that you made. So there is also an underlying forever connection with my then partner. So although we're not in contact, we're not in day-to-day contact, we still, I'll get a text every now and again, like on a birthday or something like that, and just to check in and hi, how are you? And, I might do the same. Or if a thought comes up, I might just send him a quick WhatsApp. My husband knows about this, so I'm not saying anything that I'm doing anything that's like would be against what my marriage values are or anything like that. But you can't explain it because like the two of you created something together, and although it never came to fruition, it's a bond that you can't ever break. So that's something that's also and also we many years later we had an opportunity to talk it out together. And how we had both reacted at the time when we were in our 20s, and that was very healing as well. And so we he atoned for some of the choices and decisions that he made at the time, which in hindsight were not supportive at all.
Okay, yeah, and was he regretful of that?
Completely, and he lives with regret.
Okay,
so he if he could turn the clock back, he would have done things very differently, and and that's his pain to own and his choice, whereas I don't. But I always knew that if I got pregnant again, whatever means, accident or whatever, is that I would not have a second abortion.
Okay.
So every relationship that I then had thereafter, it was kind of like, third date conversation, you need to know that. I can remember I've been married twice, so I can remember having that conversation with the guy who became my first husband on our third date, when things were getting pretty heated, it was like, never mind consent. It's like, actually, there's another conversation we need to have here.
How did he react to that?
He was okay, actually. He was just like, well, like I've always thought that I would have a family one day, so whatever, cool, like I think he was more interested in getting his end away at the time, than worrying about what the consequences might be. But, that was something that I was very clear with in my own mind after that I would never do it again. Yeah. And that doesn't judge any women who have had more than one abortion. I do know some women who have had more than one abortion for various different reasons. But I mean, later in life, like our first child, I had my first child when I was 34, and there was on the scans that we had, it showed that he had a very high potential to have Down syndrome. And I can remember us going through all of the sort of like potential treatments for that to try and get a definitive diagnosis.
Yes.
And we got referred up to the RVI for the to the fetal medicine unit, which is not a place you ever want to be. No. You go into these like tiny little waiting rooms with nothing on the walls except a big box of tissues in the middle of the table, and you're thinking, yeah, this is the place they deliver really bad news. And the only way that they could confirm definitively was if they did a full amniocentesis where they invade the pregnancy, which then possibly has a potential, can cause miscarriage and stuff. And I was very clear that that was not going to happen. You can do all the scans you want, you can give me all the risk factors that you want, and then me and my husband, we had to have the conversation that says, well, are we prepared to raise a disabled child if that's what lies ahead? And thankfully we were both on the same page, and then thankfully he came out and he's absolutely right as rain and fine and dandy. But that was an interesting mindset. I might have had a different reaction if I hadn't have had an abortion. I might have been happier to go through with the full testing and then make a different decision. I mean, certainly if I'd been faced with the likelihood that a baby that would die very quickly after birth, I think that's a very difficult decision anyway. But I think that I mean, everyone's has their own choice, but I could see that I potentially might have had a different change of mind if that was the reality that I was being presented with when I was now pregnant with who is now my first child. But that wasn't the situation.
Yeah, still there's so many traumatic decisions involved. It's something that people would consider, certainly I considered it quite straightforward. You have a pregnancy, you have a baby. So many things I took for granted, and so many emotions at stake, so many decisions about your body, about the life you're creating. It's scary. And you mentioned about how you kept it to yourself. Did you tell many people at the time?
Nobody. Not my mother, not my best friend, nobody. The only person who knew was my partner, and he was from quite a strong religious family. So that was his main fear, was don't tell whatever, because that he knew that his family would not agree with terminating the pregnancy at all. No, I didn't even tell. I didn't tell. I made up an excuse for work as well. Because I had it on the Friday, and I went back to work on the Monday, and I was in the toilets throwing up on the Tuesday, because obviously I'm still getting over the anaesthetic, and I'm still bleeding, and hormones, all that kind of stuff. And I told them I had gastroenteritis, so they signed me off for the rest of the week. So it's just crazy now. And even now, I mean, it's still not something that's talked about.
No.
And I think the younger generation are a little bit different, because I have got some friends who are in their 20s. And, there's one person in particular that I am thinking about, and I know that she has had an abortion. And I also know that some of her girlfriends at the same age have also had a termination. This isn't a badge of honour by any stretch of the imagination, but I know that they have all supported each other and they have talked about it. Whereas, I've got a really close group of girlfriends. And if it wasn't for the fact that I had written a book where the main character's main source of pain is the fact that she has an abortion in the middle of this story, which then prompted people to come forward and go, how much of this is true? Which then kind of opened the door. But even now, I mean, I wouldn't know if any of my closest girlfriends had ever had an abortion. It's still, I'm in my 50s, I'm in my early 50s. And I just think if you had especially, if you're my age and you had an abortion in your 20s, that meant you were having an abortion in the early 1990s.
Yeah.
So if that is something that you have experienced, I would be very surprised if a lot of women are being open about it, like I'm being with you now.
Yeah, no, I'm so grateful, because I think we need to be open about it to remove that shame that shouldn't be there. Yeah. I remember, late 90s, there was a girl I was at school with who had one, and I don't know, it was just bred into our culture that it was seen as like, oh, it's the worst possible thing to happen. And there was another friend that, happened when we were playing sports together, but no one ever talked about it. It was just kind of whispered about, and I would have liked if I could turn back the time.
And in a very negative way.
Yes, yeah, totally.
Not like a,
not supportive.
Not support, like, oh my goodness, I wonder what she's going through, or how how she must be feeling, or the confusion that might lead to, or how how did she end up in that situation? Because there's a million reasons as to how you could end up with an unwanted pregnancy or an unplanned pregnancy.
And I don't think any of we were her teammates. I don't think we asked at any point how she was, how she was coping. It was almost just like, let's not talk about it. Let's move on. But I'm ashamed of that.
Well, don't be, because I think it was just society at the time.
But we need to change it. I'm glad you've kind of said that some of the younger generations, they are talking about it now, because if anything, they should. You've got the right. It's your body. You should be able to do what you want to do with it, and it's almost a positive thing that you can take ownership of that. But I mean, how do you think? Obviously, we touched on the politics. There was a whole Roe versus Wade thing.
Oh my gosh, I'm like, there's a huge. I mean, more so for my own healing, but then also when I started writing fiction, which, as you know, I mean, most people know me for business, which is what I do for work, but I also, my passion project is that I write under a pen name and I write women's fiction, and partly that was driven by my own story, and my sort of way of giving it air was to craft it into a fictional character and use a lot of my personal experiences and then put it in there. So in the process of coming up with this, I obviously started to really research like, what is the state of access to abortion in different parts of the world, and how does it impact women, and so on and so forth. And the statistics are really shocking. Less than half of the world's female population have access to legal abortions, and statistically, reducing access to legal abortions does not reduce abortions. So the only impact is that more people die. So, backstreet abortions, as was pre the world of now being able to access that kind of support and healthcare, doesn't stop abortions happening. And, I actually, I was literally publishing my novels when the Roe versus Wade argument was got overturned, and everybody was kind of like, it'll never happen, because obviously it's like, makes common sense, and then it did happen. And then there was a big backlash in the UK, because actually the right to abortion is not enshrined in law in the UK. It's just assumed, and it is due to be redebated quite soon, to make it actually, to protect that right. And it does feel that there are parts of our society where we are slipping backwards in terms of equal opportunities. There's a very interesting study, and I've forgotten the woman's name who did it, but it's called the Turnaway Study. Diana somebody, who wrote a book about it in the US. And the argument for pro-life is always about the impact. The argument that politicians use, particularly in the US, is that the damage psychologically to a woman having an abortion, right? There's the right to life argument in terms of the fetus, but there's also the argument is that it's psychologically too damaging for a woman to have an abortion, and that's what they sort of base their arguments on. So there was this study done in the US. It's really annoying me now that I can't remember her name. I'll remember it at the end and go, but the book's called The Turnaway Study.
Okay.
And obviously it's an academic study. But the flaw in the political argument is that they always use data from women who've had an abortion and then women who didn't have an abortion. Right. Whereas the Turnaway Study looks at two different sets of data. They look at women who had an abortion and then women who were turned away from an abortion, so either because they were in the wrong state, they were past their, because obviously they've got very strong rules in various states in the US or so on, or they physically couldn't access one, or they didn't have the means to, or the resources or the money or whatever. And then over a whole range of factors, looking at socioeconomic, psychological status, financial freedom, whatever, is they measure all of these factors in these two groups of women over the next, I think it's the next 15, 20 years. And in every single one, the women who were denied access to abortion performed poorer. Their scores were lower than those who wanted an abortion and had one. So not that sort of gives me peace in my decision, because I knew that already. I already know that like it was the right decision for me, no matter how painful it was, no matter how traumatic it was, no matter how hard it was to go through, no matter how unprepared I was for both the physical and the psychological trauma, which, you know, deeply affected me. I still know that it was the right decision.
Yeah.
And therefore, to answer your original question is, do I feel guilty or do I? No. Do I harbour shame? No longer.
Good.
But I did for a long time.
Oh, yeah. It still makes me
breathe.
I know it just makes me angry, you know, that people out there are making decisions about other women's bodies and putting them in danger, because like you say, they're still going to find a way to make it happen. And it makes me angry that it seems to be getting worse again.
Oh yeah, I mean that's a whole other debate, but you know, it's I mean the history repeats itself, sadly, and the statistics are there from history. It's what evidence you choose to focus on. But at the heart of this is usually a very frightened, often very young woman with a lack of resources, feeling shamed, feeling that they have nowhere to turn to, and feeling very stigmatized.
Yeah, it's tragic. And yeah, a question that I wondered, I've been through miscarriages, and I know you have yourself as well.
Yeah.
There can sometimes be a slight bit of resentment to people who've chosen the abortion option, when you feel that, you know, I just wish I could have a baby and have that option.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that?
I was my own worst critic because the guilt that I carried was that might have been my only chance to be a parent or to be a mother, and that I, by my own choice, had destroyed that. And so you know this, but I have had 6 pregnancies. I have 2 children. So I've had, one miscarriage and one abortion and 3 miscarriages. So creating my family was, by a long way, not easy. I didn't seem to have a problem making babies. I had a problem hanging on to them. And I know there's lots of women out there who can't get over the first hurdle, or lots of families who struggle to even conceive. So part of my own process of forgiveness was having a child, and I knew, like, once it's so bizarre, because as a woman you spend half of your fertile life trying not to get pregnant, and you make the assumption that when you do want to have a family that it'll just happen.
Totally.
And then you spend the next half of your assuming it's planned, trying to create a family, and then realizing that there's a whole other set of rules and game plan and stuff. So it was very hard. And as I've already explained to you, in fact, when I was pregnant with my first child, I thought I'd had a miscarriage. So I'd had a miscarriage before that, a very early one. And then, so obviously that just fed into my own psychology of like, well, you deserve this, all that inner critic stuff. And then when I was pregnant with my first child, it was like I thought I'd lost him, or I kind of thought I might be pregnant, hadn't done a test yet, but was a couple of days or weeks late, and then had a bleed. So I thought, oh, well, I'm not pregnant. And then realised, like, the next thing I knew, I had my head down the toilet, like, throwing up first thing in the morning. I thought, hang on a minute. And then did a test. And I remember going to the doctor and saying, well, I could be, like, 5 weeks pregnant, or I might be 9 weeks pregnant, and I don't know. And he said, well, the only way we're going to find out is if we do a scan. It turned out when I went to a scan, I was 11 weeks pregnant. So I definitely was pregnant through that first bleed, and they think I was carrying twins and lost one.
Oh, yeah.
So I don't know. I never had that confirmed. But then, of course, I had all the issues where, we thought Ty might have Down syndrome or, whatever and stuff like that. And that was partly the reason why, as I've already explained, I definitely knew I wanted to. Well, I just thought that, sometimes you make decisions in life that ultimately change the course of your life. And sometimes you have to accept the things that are given to you. And in both of those instances, when I was pregnant, in my 30s, knowing I wanted a child, it was like, well, if this is the gift I'm going to be given, then I'm going to receive it gratefully.
Yeah.
But the relief once I'd had my first child, it didn't feel like I was holding the child that I'd lost. So there wasn't like some people talk about their rainbow baby.
Yes, yeah.
Definitely not. All of my babies have their own identities.
Yes, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And whether they were born or not.
I can relate to that.
Yeah. And I also, completely no evidence for this, but I have 2 boys, and I absolutely fundamentally believe that my aborted child was a girl.
Okay.
I don't know why.
Yeah.
I just have the sense that
I have senses about the ones I miscarried and the sex of them, and you just feel it. Mm-hmm. You'll never know if you were right or wrong. But yeah.
And there is actually, I've done loads of therapy and I've done loads of woo-woo stuff and things over the year. And I did hear someone say that every child that is lost, 2 things actually that relate back to what I've already said is that through whatever means, termination, miscarriage or whatever, is like part of their cells are reabsorbed into the mother's body.
Okay,
right?
yeah.
So the fact that you have a sense or I have a sense makes perfect sense to me because you're carrying them with you. And the other thing is because that was a fertilized egg, part of your partner's cells are also absorbed into your body.
Okay, yeah.
So you know how I said I still have this, I can't explain bond with that person. I have no romantic, connection or feelings or anything like that, but there is something between him and I that we will carry with us to the grave, is partly because I believe there's a part of him still within me that I still carry energetically through that part of me that reabsorbed that.
That's so interesting. I never knew that. That actually brings me comfort about my losses.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're still there.
Yeah, I feel quite emotional hearing that, actually.
I know. So, yeah.
Wow. So you've had your miscarriages and you've had your abortion. Were there any similarities in feelings around those issues?
Physically.
Both, really, or physically and emotionally?
Yeah, emotionally they were different. Physically they felt very similar. So anyone who has had baby loss of any kind will know that you go from this feeling of like raging pregnancy hormones, which is indescribable unless you've experienced it, because, like the art of being pregnant and carrying a child to full term goes against every part of any other type of nature, because essentially you have a parasite in your body that rather than choosing to expel it, you are wanting to hold on to and nurture and allow it to leach from you everything that it needs to survive, right? And the way that your body does that is through the hormones that are released, that allow you to, your entire psychology, mindset, physiology and psychology changes when you are pregnant, no matter how, and I've always known I was pregnant even before the stick went blue, because I could just feel it.
Okay.
Especially after being pregnant 6 times, it's like, I just know. I almost know like the day after conception, it's like, yeah, I can feel that,
See, I lost trust with my body because I've got endometriosis, so the symptoms are very similar to pregnancies. And I had infertility. It took us about 2.5 years to make our first. And so every month I felt I was pregnant, and whether or not I just lost it really early each time,
maybe
I felt I was pregnant. So in the end, I just lost any trust in my body, which is an awful thing to lose. But yeah, so I never, I did, maybe I did, but then I lost it because it just never happened.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's great that you do.
So
or did.
When you've had that baby loss, it is so visceral and it is so instant. Like you go from feeling pregnant to feeling not pregnant like that, like literally within a few hours. And your body like feels that loss instantly. And my initial feeling, not with my termination, but that was what I was grieving when I was grieving the loss of that feeling of nurturing something, of knowing that there was something coming that you had like cut dead, essentially. Whereas with my miscarriages, my instant reaction was like, I need to replace that feeling. Like, drop your pants, mister, we're going again.
Yeah.
And thankfully, my husband, who is very sane, like kind of looked me in the eyes and said, I ain't touching you until you sort your head out kind of mindset, until I had worked and processed through the loss to then feel balanced again. So there was the kind of like, I'm saying normal pregnancy loss. What's a normal pregnancy loss? But let's say you lose through miscarriage, and I'm talking an early stage miscarriage here. I'm not talking about a stillbirth or someone who's had to terminate a pregnancy at a very late stage. I'm talking about 90% of miscarriages that happen in the first trimester. Is you've kind of it's a physical grief because your body is adapting to that very fast change in hormones, but also there's a psychological shift because you're allowing yourself to start to picture what a future might look like and envisage that, and then boom, reality changes and you change direction. The difference psychologically with the abortion was actually the dichotomy of those two things, because you are choosing to not have this child, you are choosing the future that you already anticipated.
I see.
But what I wasn't prepared for was the conflict of my own body against that mindset.
Okay, yes.
So I was then forced to have to grieve the loss of the baby and the future that it might have been, even though it isn't what I chose.
Yes.
Just a quick message from our sponsor, Be Daily. If you'd like all the relevant business news that you need to know on a daily basis delivered directly to your inbox, please subscribe to Be Daily.
Does that make sense?
It makes sense. I think, until you explain that, it's hard for you to understand because you think, oh, it's your choice. So, yeah, it's what you wanted. But, there's still that grief, and it sounds like the grief's very similar to the miscarriage. But almost with the miscarriage, you don't have potentially the guilt and the shame to deal with as well. So it almost makes it even more hard in one respect.
Yeah.
But yeah, something I wasn't prepared for was the physical side of a miscarriage.
Oh no. I mean, there's the physical side, but then there's the internal physical side as well,
Yeah, and I had one very early miscarriage, which was found on a scan afterwards when I was having fertility treatment, and I didn't even know I'd had it. So actually, that was a lot easier. The emotional side was incredibly tough, but I just got sent home both times, and I didn't expect to actually almost give birth. Yes, it was very small at the time, but just in the shower at home, and just by myself. And
pregnancy sac.
Yeah, the sac, and you could see the little fetus inside it, and it was. I was just kind of in shock, and I just didn't know really how to react. It wasn't until afterwards, and this is maybe something quite sad, and I haven't shared it with many people, but I took photos of it because that's my baby. I can understand that. And
I'm going to tell you something now. Yeah, is that my last miscarriage? I had it 13 weeks on a plane coming back from Singapore.
Oh my goodness!
And I had ummed and ahed about whether to do this business trip, but my midwife had cleared me. She said, "No, you're fine. Everything go." And then I got to Singapore, and I felt different. There was something about, like, I think I had I think the baby had died. Like, I think for whatever reason, I think it had been a missed miscarriage, as they call it, right? Because I can remember looking in the mirror, getting out the shower and looking in the mirror and going, well, I know I am pregnant because look, I've got the beginning of a bump, but I felt different. Yes. And then I think that the just either the timing or the stress on the body of a long haul flight home then caused me to miscarry. And I actually miscarried. I mean, I flew from like Singapore to Bangkok, Bangkok to London, London to Newcastle, and I miscarried 15 minutes before landing at Newcastle.
Oh my goodness.
So just as like they were literally about to put the seatbelt signs on. And I felt it happen, and I didn't have that opportunity to see the fetus and to see the sac. And that was more traumatic because it got sucked away in the airport, in the toilet of the aircraft. And I mean, it was just like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre in there. And then bing, the seatbelt sign goes on. I'm like, had to sort of like somehow find the strength to pull myself back together, to get back to my seat, to go and like, and of course I had nothing on me because I wasn't planning to miscarry. So of course I was like, you know, I had no sanitary products or anything. I was in a right state.
And the bleeding's so heavy.
Yeah. So, and again, me being me, I didn't tell anybody, didn't ask for help from the stewards or anything. It's like, you know, I was just using what I could get my hands on at the time. And then thankfully my husband met me at the airport and we just went home. Actually, I went to A&E is what happened. But that feeling of knowing that I felt it happen, because you feel the pregnancy sac pass. It feels like passing like a peach or something, big, like a piece of fruit, doesn't it? And as I turned, because I turned, it triggered the flush in the toilet in the airport, in the airline toilet, and it was gone. And I put my hands down the toilet trying to find it.
Oh my goodness!
Because you're still wanting to protect that child. So I know that's so graphic, and I'm so sorry for anyone listening. But if anyone has experienced that, they'll know exactly how that feels. And then that was a double kind of whammy, because that was a child that was wanted, desperately wanted, and then lost without being, you know, seen, if that makes sense.
It's horrendous.
So I can completely understand why you took photographs of it.
Yeah. Oh, but just a horrific experience. And also I didn't realise that you got contractions, very painful contractions as well. So how did you deal with that on an airline?
Oh, it was that's a story for another day, but it wasn't great. But it's interesting because when you have a termination, is when you go in for your scan, because they always scan you, and then you may or may not get an abortion that same day, or they go back or whatever like that, is they don't show you the screen. Is they turn a screen away.
Yeah.
And I can remember trying to look at the screen, because you know that there's a picture there, there's a sac there, but obviously because psychologically they assume that it's better for you not to know, not to see. It's just ignore it as if it's not happening. And looking back, I think I don't think that's the best way to deal with it. I don't know how they deal with it now, whether they give you that option. I mean, not quite that, like, well, do you want to take a photograph home of the baby that you're not going to have? But you know, it's this real dichotomy, as I've just explained, about, you know, what's going on in your body, and then the decision that you've made psychologically, and reconciling that. And I don't think society's way of dealing with this has always been shame and denial. You know, push it to the don't talk about it, swallow it, and live in shame. And actually, psychologically, I don't think that's particularly healthy. And I think everybody's way of dealing with it will be unique.
Yeah, totally. And I think for the majority of people, though, it'd be nice to know that they can talk about it. It's certainly helped me, and that's certainly a reason why I like to talk about it now. I don't like to; it's still painful, but I think it's important for the future generations. But the hardest thing I think to deal about miscarriage was that. So in one of them, it was about 12 weeks. I'd been scanned before that. I saw the heartbeat and everything. And then the next scan, there was no heartbeat.
Yeah, so it was a miscarriage.
But it messes with your head, because, you know, it had a heartbeat, so it was alive, and then it didn't, so it was dead. But then how could it be dead if it hadn't been born? And it felt like my grief wasn't true, because
or didn't feel like you had. It was
I didn't have the right. Yeah, I didn't have the right, and I struggled with that.
Yeah. It's a very, you know, everybody's story is unique, as you know, but you know, and pregnancy, wanted or unwanted, is a very complex subject.
Absolutely.
And I'm just very grateful that I was able to access the healthcare that I needed at the time that I needed it.
Yeah, we
no
are
matter
so lucky.
how traumatic it was. Because I don't believe I would have the life that I have now. I don't believe I would be the parent that I am now to the children that I have. I don't believe I would have been able to I don't believe I would have given that child what it would have needed. I just don't believe. I know there was no way I could have given that child. And I can remember the night before I was going to the clinic, I can remember writing in my journal and asking for its forgiveness. I might get upset. And just saying that, you know, like, please forgive me for what I'm about to do, but know that you were loved, that you are loved, and you're just here too soon, and I can't give you what you need. And it was almost like writing a prayer. And I can remember sort of cradling my tiny bump as it was then, and going to bed praying for it to forgive me for what I was about to do. And that was tough.
Yeah. It's horrendous. You're being so brave. Thank you for speaking about it so openly. So, on to your book
stories,
writing.
yeah, I know.
And it's amazing. I've read the first one, A Flame Unburned,
Yeah.
which is a powerful read, very emotional, especially knowing that it kind of mirrors some of the things you've been through in life. What inspired you to start writing, and why under the pen name Isabella Wiles?
Oh, so I always felt that I could write a novel. I mean, a lot of people think like that. You know, a lot of people have this sort of pipe dream of like, you know, I'm going to write a story. And as you know, I've already written nonfiction for business. So I know I've got the discipline to write long form. And I always thought there's lots of things that I could draw on in life experiences that might make a good story. And I personally like reading really well crafted, twisty women's fiction novels. I'm not although there is a lot of romance in my books, I'm not a fan of the inverted commas romance genre where it's very trope driven and it's very formulaic. I much prefer stories that are kind of, you don't know what the ending's going to be, and there's you're stuck between a rock and a hard place and that kind of thing. And then I was actually told to do it by a psychic, which is a whole other story. But you know,
I'm into that.
Yeah, girlfriends a night and a psychic there. We were all around there, and I, you know, had my glass of wine, and off I was toddled for me 20 minutes in the front room with this guy, and he started to tell me some things, and the first thing he said was, "You've had an abortion," and
Wow.
I was like, hadn't told a soul. And then he also said some things about, and I was thinking, and I've not told anyone that, or that, or that, or that. And then he was saying, you've been thinking about writing your life story. And I was like, well, yeah, but no. And he was saying, I'm being told that you absolutely must do this. So I came out of that meeting just thinking, right, well, I'm absolutely not going to write an autobiography, because that's just like, well, one, who am I to do that? But two, it wouldn't be that interesting. But what I could do is I could write autobiographical fiction, and I could blend what I've used, which a lot of authors do this, you know, where it's like they draw on life experiences, especially in their early books, early works. If you want to figure out a real author, read their debut, right? Because that's normally some kind of reflection of their life experience and stuff. And what really compelled me was I've got this real there's the feminist in me, is I really feel that like literature is a form of art, and then art is a form of reflecting society. And if we can use our voice to give voice to the parts of society that are shamed, then we can collapse that shame.
Yes.
And most books, if you read them, and there's a trope that we call secret baby, right? If there's a secret baby trope in the book, they almost always, I can't even think of a story where the baby isn't born and they all live happily ever after, even if it was unwanted at the beginning, right? And I thought, well, where's the book that tells my story?
Yeah.
That tells the story about somebody who, you know, had an unwanted pregnancy but still lives happily ever after. How do you write that story? So that was really the motivation behind it. And that's why I started the series, and then it kind of went on from there, and I'm writing book 5 at the moment, in a different series, not this one. But and the reason to do it under a pen name was two things. Was one, I thought if it bombs, I can disappear off into obscurity and no one will ever know. The second thing was to protect my children.
Okay.
Although, to be fair, you don't have to dig very far behind Isabella Wiles to find the real me.
Yeah.
Because they're quite saucy, and there's sex on the page.
Oh, I enjoyed that.
You enjoyed that bit, did you? But it was I don't write sex on the page unnecessarily, and it's not in all of my novels, but in this series, because part of her journey was through her own sexual awakening, and there's this underlying abortion story that weaves through the whole series. It had to be on the page. It didn't feel authentic to just do what we call fade to black.
Okay.
You know, where you kind of get to the bedroom door and then it all...
Right.
And then you wake up the next morning.
Yes.
It was like, because her mind, you know, like after she's had an abortion, in the second book, there's a moment where a condom snaps.
Oh.
Right. Now, I've just told you, you know, my story about, well, you know, like if we do it and get pregnant, we're having a baby kind of thing. So
Yes.
I had to have that on the page to be able to explore the psychology about the trauma that was then triggering within her,
absolutely.
and then the reaction of her partner at the time and so on. So I had to put the sex on the page, and that was another reason why I did it under a pen name. And the third reason was to protect my business brand.
Okay.
So, nothing more than marketing, as in, kind of like, obviously I write books and publish and speak and consult in business, as you know. And I didn't want people Googling like keynote speaker for sales conference and then what, she writes saucy novels, kind of coming up. So it was a marketing decision as well.
Okay.
Lots of authors do it.
Yeah.
There's authors write in different genres. They might write in crime and romance and stuff, and they'll have a different pen name for each thing. It just becomes really difficult when you get really famous, because then it's like, well, which name do you go on Lorraine Kelly with,
Of course. All problems you'll face in the future, I'm sure. And I've read A Flame Unburned.
Yeah.
And that covers, the abortion.
The initial story, yeah.
What do the other books cover?
Do you have an idea for a podcast in your head? If so, we can record, produce, and promote that podcast to bring it to life. Contact us today to find out how.
So the second book is a marriage story. So you've got this underlying theme where, spoiler alert, if you're going to read these books, is like, I think you're going to find out that she has an abortion in the first story.
Sorry.
But there's a lot more around it by that. And that story resolves in a way that readers don't really expect it to, but it's the right outcome for her at the end of that book. And then she goes on, but the romance with the first guy, Chris, the arc for that romance doesn't finish until the end of the series.
Okay, interesting.
Okay? So he crops up in all of the other books, but she has two other great loves, because the series is called The Three Great Loves of Victoria Turnbull. So Chris is the first guy, the guy from New Zealand, and so on. And then they have this experience. And then the second book is really an exploration of marriage. So she has a marriage in the second book, but the challenge with it is that both of them are carrying secrets into the marriage. We as the reader know what Victoria's secret is from her first book, and we uncover what Craig's secret is by the end of the book. But because they're not revealing them to themselves, they're never being fully authentic.
Right.
So even though on the surface everything looks really hunky-dory, and it's also like all the side characters, you're in that phase of your life where everyone's getting married and so on and so on. And then the last book closes the arc, because the last book, A Star Unborn, is a baby story. And now she's at a point where she is with someone that she wants to have a baby with, and she discovers that she can't, or it's more difficult to have. She's kidding herself, and at the beginning of the book she's telling herself she's got everything she ever needs. She's got a successful business. She loves being auntie to all of her friends' kids, and then she meets someone, they try and have a baby, and then complications then ensue, and as I say, the setup from the first book doesn't pay off until literally the last page.
You know how to get people buying more.
So I've literally had readers like email me and say they got to like 3 pages before the end of the final book and like literally put the book down and just like sob, and then in happy tears, but then sobbing. It's sad tears and then sobbing happy tears within like 2 page turns and stuff. So like, and just going, oh my God. So that feels great to have achieved that.
Yeah, I can't wait to read the rest. So one thing that you read to me quite early on was a blurb in the back of the final book.
It's in the back of this book, yeah.
It would be just lovely to read it, because it is so aligned to...
back on.
Without kind of ruining anything plot-wise, but just when you read it to me, it's so aligned with a lot of kind of what we've shared today, my reasons for doing this podcast, and even like the mission of my own kind of business as well. So I'll leave you to read it.
So I'll not read all of it because it's quite long, but it gives you a gist of so there's a word from the author at the end of the final book in the series, which is recommended that you read. It says read after the series as it contains spoilers. So here we go. I remember distinctly lying in bed the night before I was due to have an abortion, and all of the overwhelming emotions I was feeling at that time: desperation, grief, shame. This was back in 1994 in England, a time when abortion was not openly talked about, yet thankfully was legal and safe, and I was able to access the care I needed. I also remember the sense of injustice, anger and shame when I suffered not 1 but 3 miscarriages a decade later. So although Victoria's story is not my own, it's fair to say I was able to draw on my own personal experiences when crafting her character. My intention when I had the idea for these stories was always to write a darn good yarn that had you turning pages long into the night. but also to shine a light on many of the topics I believe are not sufficiently talked about, mainly because they remain highly divisive and often taboo subjects, yet are experienced firsthand by millions of women, namely coercive relationships, sexual and physical violence against women, divorce, miscarriage, and abortion. So many women go through these experiences feeling desperately alone and ashamed, believing they have nowhere to go and no one to turn to. I know that's how I felt. And shame breeds silence, silence breeds isolation, and isolation breeds repression. Once repressed, it's easier for those with power to take away our agency, which is why I wanted to write a story that represented women like me. I also wanted to write it for all the people who may not understand or share the same opinions and belief as women like me, or understand why we have made the choices we have.
So powerful. I feel that's a perfect note to end the podcast on, because that's, what I'm trying to do here as part of my podcast, remove that shame, remove that stigma, and hopefully, and thank you for sharing your story, because you're helping too. So thank you.
Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for giving me the opportunity.
But we're not going to go yet, because it's time for the regular questions.
Oh, now I looked at these and I scan-read them and went, what? And I haven't had time to process them, so this will be off the top of my head.
No worries, and it can just be a quick fire thing.
Okay.
So basically, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the worst, 10 being the best, it's a bit of fun. We ask you to rate yourself at the following 10 things.
Oh my goodness.
How good looking are you, Nicola?
Oh God. Well, makeup helps a lot. So with makeup, I would say 6.
Cool. How funny are you?
Now, I would rate myself as not funny, but I do know that some people do think I am funny, but it's usually not intentionally. So again, maybe just a 5, 6.
Okay. Are you a good cook?
No, that's definitely not my department. I'd put myself as a 2 for that.
Are you good at singing?
I was good at singing. I used to sing in a choir, actually. So I'd give myself an 8 for that.
Oh, amazing. What type of music would you sing?
Oh, it was just choir music.
Yeah.
I was a soprano. Don't make me sing now, but it's like, yeah.
That's amazing. Do you drink much alcohol, and are you good at it?
Used to. God, Nicola in the 1920s would have been an 11 on this. I think Nicola in her 50s today, I would say is about a 4. I'm a cheap date these days.
Really, how good at parenting are you? It's a really contentious question.
Ooh. God, I mean, have you had a podcast about parenting guilt?
It comes up a lot, to be honest.
That's a whole other area. Is I think raising children is the most challenging job anybody ever has. End of. I'd say I'm okay. I'm going to give myself a 7.5. I think I've got happy, healthy, balanced kids. And my goal is always to be able to pay for their therapy later in life. So.
Oh, bless. How good a friend are you?
I think I'm a pretty good friend. I would give myself an 8 for that.
Brilliant. Yeah. How intelligent are you?
This sounds a bit braggy to say that, oh, yes, I'm really intelligent. I know I do have quite a high IQ. My IQ is 137.
Okay, wow.
And I think I'm intelligent in some ways. I think I'm a very good communicator. I think I have a brain that works very quickly and I can problem solve very quickly. Academically, rubbish. Failed everything at school. Haven't got an undergraduate degree, all that kind of stuff. But I think I have areas of intelligence that others don't.
Oh, absolutely. How kind are you?
I think I'm pretty kind. I think that's one of my strengths, actually. I'd probably give myself an 8 or a 9 for that.
Lovely. And finally, how good at sex are you?
You should ask my husband this question. Well, again, Nicola in her 20s read my books would be my answer there.
Yeah, well, I've read the first one. You seem pretty good at that.
Yeah, sex in your 50s, yeah. I'll tell a very quick story to end, right?
Please do.
Oh, God. I can't believe my husband's going to kill me for saying this. Is we have 3 categories of sex, right?
Okay.
Right. We have what we call Kentucky buckets, right? Which is just quick, get it done, just you need to eat, right? Then we have like staple sex, which is like what we call home cooked grub, right? You know, like you want a nice, good home cooked Sunday dinner once a week or something that's just really substantial, you know, that you kind of wholesome look forward. And then every now and again you have like a full on gourmet dinner, go out, you know, like a Michelin star like that. And that maybe doesn't happen that often. And yeah, so like I can't give myself a score there because I think I'm good in all of those 3 areas.
Wow. I love that.
But we used to talk about when the kids were being raised and stuff. It's like, you know, like you wake up in the morning to the smell of a stinky nappy, and it's like, okay, I'll swap you an on-demand Kentucky bucket if you take that nappy. Stuff like that. So,
Amazing. Oh, I love that. That's wonderful.
Yeah,
Thank you for telling me about your Kentucky bucket.
Okay, God. Oh,